Okay, so I thought I would create this video today on working in information technology, not as a, uh continuous employee of like the top, like those big software companies, but as an average programmer getting out into the industry and trying to start up, because the experiences and situations you will encounter are significantly different if you're starting up and you don't have one of the big software companies on your resume and you don't have extremely high grades because the A team sells, right? Um, so if you've and people that have been continuously employed also sells. So if you did take a break, say to start your own company that didn't work out, or decided to travel before um, getting your first job, or you went back to school for a different program, decided you want to come back to programming after a long break, um, the situation is distinctly different. Um, so most of the times, in these cases, when you are getting your first job, you're probably going to go through an um, employment agency. The reason why a lot of employers use employment agencies is to offset the risk of nepotism, as well as the amount of work it takes to find suitable candidates. I remember I went through like 50 resumes before for a particular specialized programming position. Everyone had the set of credentials saying that they knew what this stuff was, that they were able to work on it. They had all the keywords on their resume, but when I started questioning them about um, the specifics, they weren't able to answer the questions. So it's very easy to put certain information on a resume, but actually knowing how to work with the actual applications is very rare. Um, some people could review it, and even if you have worked in it, a lot of the times the questions that are asked by hiring agents are so specific that you might not know. They're so basic. Like you're not going to remember those low level detailed things that you learned in school. Sometimes they'll try to go back to that, to like big O notation and stuff when you didn't really have to use it for like database programming. So when you're trying to get back into it, you might have forgotten it, right? So I found that a kind of odd. So oftentimes they use agencies in order to shift through the candidates and get people that have either worked in the industry and have that experience and that knowledge basis, or get the most suitable agents, um, hiring candidates. But anyways, let us continue. So now we know that you're probably going to go through an agency for that first job if you didn't get hired directly by a company. And that is the most likely course of actions, because I haven't seen many companies hire, at least especially software companies, hire directly. It's very difficult to get your resume picked up unless you have experience directly by a company, unless you have experience, and then more often than not, you're going to probably get picked up by smaller companies or mid-tier companies rather than the large companies, like banks and other places. Okay, so now let's talk about working through them based on laws and the particular countries. Another reason why people use a lot of agencies is that it can either hurt you or help you. Some agencies will gather and talk to actual employers as you're working and keep their references and a list of tasks that you have done. Not all, but many of them, because the managers can enter it in the system. Because uh, getting when a lot of students graduate, they're going to put out everything on their resume that they've ever done, even if they don't know it. So getting accurate references of actual tasks people have worked on is actually hard. So a lot of agencies actually record that. Not all of them, but some. Some agencies just interview you and put you through. And then they give employers sort of a guarantee that if they don't like you after like a month or two, they'll refund the money. Some of them do that. They have different angles because they're fighting over contracts. Oftentimes, they can help you get a new position based on information they gather and put into their system. So if they have these references with integrity from the managers in their system, it's more trusted. And trust is a big thing when hiring, especially when using agents. So in the case a contract does come to an end, because you're working somewhere and perhaps, or they wanted to cut it off because you're working through an agency, because you were dealing with people that are a bit nitpicky in the aftermath, like they just didn't like you, or it happens, right? Because at the end of the day, you're working with people that are human. So you don't know what they're going to be saying if you give them as a reference. They could have pretended to like you and not really like you. Some people are catty. They might give you a bad reference despite the law. So if the actual contracting agency or the has been paying attention to this, they can give you references and enter you into that system, and they'll act as a middle layer. But they don't always help, to be honest with you. There are some, I feel like these are better agencies to work for that will have your back and gather that information, understand how the actual work environment is at different companies. But there are a lot of places that don't. And how can it hurt working for an agency? Sometimes they are there to allow the employers to cut off your contract or test you without attention to your situation. So you might go into an actual job position and they might tell you it's a long-term job position, but what happens is that if they cut off the contract, you're not eligible for unemployment, you're not eligible for benefits or the regular laws and stuff you would be allowed to get if they had if you had worked directly for them. Furthermore, the actual companies, if you're working through an agency, don't have to pay benefits like healthcare and other stuff. So if you're working through an agency, they could actually avoid those extra costs. Or the agency might say that they're giving it to you in order to get more money, and they'll pocket it because they're there to make money and they have to pay people full time. So my advice with regards to working with agency is to find a trusted sort of middleman to work with and not the agencies. Sometimes you're just a paycheck and working directly for companies can go bad. So be careful of what type of agency you work for. I have seen agencies that'll just cut off the contract or play favoritism. So they have multiple layers of agencies, and if you are, and then because there are multiple layers of agencies in between you and the client, they will give preferences to the employees that work directly for them, right? And the client won't have a say if your contract does get cut off, always, or the actual order can come from the client because there might be multiple layers of people talking to whoever makes the hiring decisions, and then they will sort of make the people that work directly look better. Unfortunately, that's how it's worked. Or I've worked for quite a lot of agencies and places, so I've seen every trick in the book. Because at the end of the day, you're working with people. Another benefit is that bad managers are a big hit to your career. They can show favoritism. So not just agencies can show favoritism for increased profits and long-term employees that they double up. Because if you're working directly for an agency and they double up you, your value goes up. And then they can bargain for increasing their profits, right? Because over time, as they move from company to company and your skills double up, you're worth more because you can solve more problems. So if you're long-term and they play favoritism, they could also put you in positions where your value will go up even more. It's like playing the stock market, right? But if you were to work directly for a company and people don't understand the specifics of working the tech industry and developing your skills, especially when you're new, bad managers are a big hit to your career as well, especially if you have to rely on them directly. They can show favoritism. They can exclude you from particular career developing training. They could exclude you from taking on skill developing tasks. So for example, they could bring you on as a developer and they're not going to put you on programming tasks or allow you to head projects and stuff like that. So while agencies can do that as well, So can bad managers, especially if they don't understand the industry and how it works. And they could fail to communicate with you. So, like, if your contract is coming to an end, well, agencies can just cut you off, so can companies. But if you're working directly for a company, even with a bad manager, you're entitled to benefits, right? And here's a funny law, especially in the States. If you're working directly for a company and they do cut you off, they have to give you your final paycheck on the spot because that is law. If they refuse to, you can actually go to the government, fill out order on their website, and then they'll have to pay you for the lost times. They actually have to pay you extra for that 2 weeks that you're waiting for your paycheck. It's a penalty or a waiting fee. So that's an interesting tidbit of information that you might need. But without that, bad references propagate. So you could get a bad reference and it'll hurt your career, even if you're a great programmer. Another thing that you should know, not all agencies do this, but many. Agencies will often funnel you through intermediate agencies if they don't plan on keeping you around for a long time, especially for shorter term contracts. Because what happens is that they can take more money from it because shorter term contracts tend to pay more, right? Because who's going to want to take on a shorter term contract for less money, right? No one wants a shorter term thing, but they're not going to tell you it's a shorter term contract. So then they'll pocket the extra money that was supposed to go to you because oftentimes when you represent yourself, the integrity or the trust of the reference isn't there, right? Because people will say everything that they can to make themselves look good. But when you've been screened and it's a third party that's worked for you or has the skills to analyze you better, your value goes up. So that trust is there. So then they can actually bargain for more for the contract. So what happens is that the agencies will take a bigger cut of the fee that was supposed to go to you, and they won't tell you it's a shorter term contract in order to scoop up a little bit more of that money. And they will place you and take more profits. You'll get higher pay. But once the contract ends, you'll be laid off, oftentimes without EI because you're working through an agency, and have a hard time getting another position unless the company is an agency that plans for it. Furthermore, for these shorter term contracts, relocations costs can add up. So if they don't tell you about this and you're moving for a higher paying job, because even with the extra cut that they take, it'll pay more than a job that you get directly. So what happens is that you'll pay these leases and sign up for these leases under the premises that they're telling you the truth, and they'll play ignorant. And then there are certain agencies that only care about their own profits and developing their candidates and making more money. And consequently, making the end customer happy is their core objective, not you or your situation. So they'll lie in order to get a suitable candidate in there in order to make their candidates look better. So in case that they have a faulty system or something, because they're trying to develop their own assets, which are the people that work directly for them, they could bring in a more experienced candidate, get them to fix the bugs in order to further sell and make the actual system look better, fix it up, teach and train the people that work directly for them, and then they're going to cut it off without telling you, and then they're going to cut the contract short, and it's at your expense. So you'll have that lease, which goes on for a year under the premises that it was a long-term contract, and they'll cut you off and you're screwed, right? Because depending on the area, sometimes they won't have a clause that allows you to early on shorten the contract. Furthermore, another problem is that if you do work directly for a company versus an agency, I'm a bit disorganized on this, so I'm going to throw in things. I'm making this up on the spot. So you won't always have, so if you're working directly for a company, and then you go to another company, and then you go to another company, say, because you like working contracts because they tend to pay a little bit more, and you don't care much about your health insurance and other benefits because you're healthy. You take care of your health, you exercise and got good stress management skills, and you don't get sick, right? You're young. People, you like your managers as well as your coworkers. The reality is that long-term jobs in mid-tier and smaller companies don't last long, right? because they're seeing the benefit of circulating people for non-maintenance positions. Because as you circulate people, you'll get to try out more people and get projects done, right? So the amount of programmers that can do things is increasing exponentially over time, especially with these boot camps and stuff. So companies have been trying a lot to try and increase the amount of skilled people as well as decrease costs. So because of this, your managers as well as your coworkers aren't always going to be at the companies you used to work for, because they might move on to another company or they might move on to their own endeavors. Especially if they're very skilled, they might even start their own company eventually, right? If they are intelligent enough and got the connections and stuff. So you're not going to always have those internal contacts at your previous company, because people flow from company to company and job to job, team to team, and projects get replaced. So that's something to note with regards to references. So let's go back a little bit more. Furthermore, bad unorganized teams, unlike and similar to managers, can also be a hit, because sometimes you might go into a situation where people are very defensive about their positions, right? They don't want to lower their worth or risk allow the risk of making themselves disposable, so they're not going to allow the flow of information to you, because they're very paranoid. Because especially if you've been in the industry a long time in a stable job and you start seeing people getting laid off, you're going to be scared, especially if you got a family and a lot of expenses and stuff. So sometimes you can get into a position where they want to get rid of you, because they want problems to exist and they want issues and more work to exist. This can create more work for you, as well as if you do get laid off because of a political situation or something, it'll be hard to get another job unless you're working with an external management consultancy or agency that pays attention to this stuff and understands that it happens. And then when you do get laid off from these places, it might be harder to get a new job, and you might have to take a lower salary, right? So that gets to my next point. Working for small companies, even if you do get your skills developed and build up yourself, can be a hit as well. The reason why is because their potential to stay around is more questionable. They got less budget, and oftentimes they have more layoffs because their budget tends to fluctuate more because they're a small start, right? It's nothing personal. Sometimes it is because it's a small company, so they're not going to have an HR department. So that could make it harder to get a new job. Furthermore, agencies tend not to, oddly, I've noticed this because I've actually encountered the situation, agencies don't pay attention to them on their resume as much. I guess it's the marketing of the company. So smaller companies that don't have a well-known name, after you work for them, it's harder to get a job at a bigger company. It's like, and if you do get another job after working for a small company or startup, your salary dips, right? So it's like not having any experience. Furthermore, small companies can go bankrupt suddenly and the profits will suddenly crash. So that's another thing to know. However, working for smaller companies, because they have less money, oftentimes you have to wear multiple hats. So you will get skills and things you wouldn't usually be able to work with or touch at larger companies. Like you will get to work with servers, or you will get exposed to deploying to production a lot faster. In fact, in my first, not my first job, but it was actually a small company where I was actually deploying to production and got to touch everything. There was basically no security, and even the QA was a lot more less rigid than when I worked for Fortune 500 companies, because at Fortune 500 companies they'll often have a lot of like regimental things in place in order to minimize the risk of errors occurring, right? So they're going to have a structured QA process depending on what company you work for. But oftentimes it's more structured and more rigid, and things tend to move a lot slower when management doesn't have programming experience because they don't understand. They've only seen the end products and worked with the end products of solutions, so they expect things to be perfect. But oftentimes, so they have this image in their head, and then they've all of a sudden been put into management positions, and they expect the developers to be what they imagined in their head, and things to work the way they did in their head. But in my experience, working with developers that are A students as well as B students as well as C students and everything in between, people make mistakes at the end of the day, right? It's just that they're caught, and the more issues you've run into along the way over time, and the more things you have dealt with will help you, and the more different programming styles you've dealt with will help you to quickly isolate the sources of errors and figure things out. So the more, that's where experience comes in. I don't think it's I don't think it's everything. I do think knowledge is number one, but experience helps you to isolate the sources of problems that you wouldn't be able to isolate because as you work on different teams and for different companies, people have different styles and they have different infrastructures. It's not all the same everywhere. So as you work with these different infrastructures and different styles and different setups of systems, even in the same language, you're going to encounter different problems for the same, for things implemented for the same functionality in different ways. And because of that, you'll be able to isolate the sources of issues when you move on to other projects a lot more quicker. Yeah, so you can actually have done a lot, but have built something from scratch, and then have built an entire application from scratch, and then you'll move to another company and work as a developer, and then you'll have difficulty because you haven't had the opportunity to not only build your own projects and see other, but work on teams and work with these systems that were built under different styles, right? Because it's different because because when you make a mistake, you'll learn how to fix it, and then when you work on your style, you'll avoid all these other mistakes. Okay, but anyways, let us continue because I've talked about this enough. So now, the first job is very hard to get. No one wants to hire a new graduate or person without experience in that technology that they're hiring for. So even if you will get laid off if you're not you're not in the top 10%, and if the skill sets you specialized in depreciate or were too specialized at your previous company. And it's hard to get another job unless you're working for an agency that hires, places people for a position that specialize in those skills because they have senior people that, or not even senior people, it's trusted people. It's big thing is trust, right? And those relationships. It's a lot more about relationships and communication than people realize, and not just for programming jobs and getting those jobs, but for everything. Communication and how likable you are is a big factor in getting opportunities and a lot of stuff, how much people like you. And that's unfortunate that bias exists in a lot of situations, but I've seen it, right? Not even in my case all the time, but in other people's cases. And yeah. So another thing is that technology, especially on the web, changes rapidly. If you've looked at my meetups and stuff, I show you how the internet used to be versus how it is now. And the same applies for technology skills and stuff. What you learn in school can become obsolete very quickly, as well as the standards over time will change very quickly. Even SQL, one of the most stable languages that I believe is going to be around for a long time, has changed since the early databases, Microsoft SQL. So if you look at the older versions, the syntax and the lower level of it that you could work with, and the functionalities introduced has changed over time. So because technology changes so rapidly and the standards change so rapidly, a lot of new things you learn are hit and miss. So you can work with a front end framework that explodes in popularity and everyone's hiring for it at one point, and then suddenly it's going to depreciate. The reason why is because they're getting people with that are new grads that are very good at programming the way they taught in school to build out these systems. So what they'll do is go for the newer technology and stuff that are very experimental and the newer libraries that everyone's raving about and gets hyped about. And then all of a sudden it turns out that they start to understand specific problems when building out their solution. Because if you build a solution without having seen the issues in different places, you're going to realize that there are unique issues that arise from it, right? So then they'll go move on to another thing, and then and that way, in order to solve those issues, they'll circulate into other technologies that everyone's raving about, without really understanding how to use their current technology in a better way. Is this good or bad? I don't know, but it makes hiring really hard. Hiring specialized people that can use something efficiently, or even people that have built systems. I've noticed even people that have built systems, oftentimes they don't understand the technology and take roundabout ways in order to build something that could be done with a lot less code, or auto-generated very easily by out-of-the-box functionality. So I've seen it again and again, but at the end of the day, no one knows everything, right? So you have to experiment, and because of that, it makes not just hiring and finding skilled candidates or experienced candidates, it increases the risk of errors, the amount of problems you have to deal with, and a lot more problems. But anyways, let us continue. Implementations, like I said before, from company to company and department to department, vary greatly because there are different people building these systems with different experience levels as well as different skills. So you might work with the technology at one company and then go to another company and see that it's difficult to pick up because they use completely different libraries and standards. I've noticed this, that in the north versus the south of the states, they tend to actually program and build things out differently. I think it's actually the agencies that are trusted. I think that they're circulating people through certain companies, and as a result, the people that are funneled into the different companies have similar experiences. So the actual structure of the systems that they built are different. And then at smaller companies, you have people that started them up that oftentimes took that jump very early in the game, because a lot more software systems are built by people, new grads, right? They tend to be more ambitious and focus on building things, right? So there's a lot of software systems that are built like that. And because of that, there's a lot of variety from small company to small company. It's even, especially the authentication, I've seen like wide varieties in how like they've implemented authentication for the same thing. Like the login systems. I've always found that odd. Very rarely do I actually see people using the identity framework as a system. And everyone thinks that their way is the best way. That's another thing. But regardless, so let us continue. Older, more developed applications I've noticed as you're working that have people that have actually circulated around and have that experience working with different technology tend to utilize a wider range of technologies and libraries that go from older to newer and require you to know a lot more in order to deal with them. It's just how it is, because furthermore, older documentation is often shady. Like the way technology is learned today is a lot easier than how it used to be learned. When the internet and a lot of technologies first came out, there weren't many videos around. The way it was learned was documentation. So you'd read this documentation on the internet or these books, and then you try to implement it. Programming wasn't widely taught or structured. It wasn't structured well until more recently. Even there weren't many software developers and computer majors that were building out these systems. It was mathematics majors and people from different fields. So Now it's gotten easier because now we have MOOCs that are having online videos that show you how to code along, and you don't have to figure out as much on your own, right? Because the information is more available, at least for programming. But at the same time, as you go from video to video and stuff, everyone has a different level of experience with them. So, uh, yeah, take it or leave it. But learning from videos, in my opinion, is a lot easier because, especially with the variations in versions of libraries, because when you're using different versions of a programming language or a coding library, there is variations in how you have to use them. So when you actually watch a video, you can see what is not communicated, and I believe that videos tend to convey more details than reading documentation or follow along from a book. It's just easier because you can see what they're doing and observe. So even if they don't see it, you can see it. And you can see the difference between what you're doing and what they're doing. So another thing, salary rates tend to vary on where you work. Inner city jobs that are easy to get transportation to and pay less and are in more nicer areas tend to pay less than positions in less accessible areas, especially for bigger companies. The same applies to the size of company. Larger companies tend to pay better because they have more financial ability, and this is also a reason why a lot of agencies hunt down companies in for short-term contracts in less accessible areas and lie to you about it. Not all agencies lie. Sometimes managers actually lie as well. It's the hiring agents. So remember, you deal with people, not actual deal with trusted people. And this is the same for everything, for opportunities, for jobs, for like business and stuff. Who you deal with is a lot more important than the company. So it might be a trusted brand or something, but then, or a trusted company. But if you work for a company for tens of years and suddenly reach out to someone that doesn't know you, they could screw you over, right? Because at the end of the day, people play favoritism and they'll lie about it because they'll say they didn't do that and stuff like that. I remember I had a small company try to lay me off, and what they wanted to do was make me sign a contract. And they said they would only give me, they played on my ignorance of the law at the time, and they said that they only would pay me my leaving pay if I signed this contract saying I wouldn't say anything bad about them or talk badly about them. So they tend to make you sign contracts in order to minimize their liability for screwing you off, screwing you over. And then, so in order to, because everyone's after money, right? At the end of the day, you need money to work. So when they're in a tight situation, some people aren't understanding because they haven't gone through the process and had to deal with um, a bad situation. Some people have basically lived an easier life, and as a result, because they don't understand the intricacies and have that bit of decency, unfortunately, you're going to deal with unethical people, and they will pull tricks in order to protect their back, unfortunately. So keep that in mind. Um, they exist, and a lot of them exist because a lot of people try to screw you over for their own profits. That's just how a lot of people have been raised. Um, so this is the issue with short-term contracts, especially smaller agencies. Um, one company I found that did this to me was Aquient. I actually went in for a job, and this was really messed up. What they did is I got a job. I went in for the first day, and that first day, even though I did the work and everything that was assigned to me, because technically you shouldn't really have to start working unless you're familiar with the system after like a couple of days, because they got to get you up to speed, set you up with a laptop and stuff. But I went in, I worked one day. At the end of the day, I was laid off because the contract allowed it to. So I don't know what that was about, but it was a 1 day thing. So that was a weird situation, and there was no liability on their part because of the contracts that were signed. So know that this exists. It's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen, but that was a total screw over, right? And an inconvenience because when you move to an area for a job, and if they're going to lay you off after 1 day and pull these tricks, What are you going to do, right? So it happens. So I don't know what that was about, to be honest. So another thing is background checks. I don't know if I should say this, but especially in software, you're going to be dealing with a lot of people that are very techy, right? And in order to protect their profits, oftentimes um, they will go out of their way to um, do things. I'm pretty, um, I think I have above average knowledge with regards to security networks because I'm certified in it and I've looked a lot at that stuff, right? I played around with that a lot. So I've actually seen my network get infected by people. I don't know if this was my employers, but I suspect it was strongly because it only happened after I connected to the VPN from my work laptop onto my home network. And I think that they did this in order to monitor me. I'll probably make a video of how to get into Windows and stuff like that and how easy it is if you haven't secured your Windows over the network in the future. But so when you monitor the network, because packets don't lie, you'll see, you can actually see certain things. And then I actually saw this, and I think it was the employers in order to keep tabs on it. So it might seem like an invasion of privacy, but when people are protecting money, it happens. And another thing, long-term employment for development roles in IT that are easy to learn is a thing of the past. So boot camps and agencies that thrive on the fact that people will come to them for skills that they're going to saturate the market, right? And then because they're saturating the market, what happens is that they can hire for these easy skills and they're going to try and minimize costs. So they're going to lower the actual length um, of the average employment thing. So you're going to find you're going to hop from job to job a lot in the past. I've even seen people from top universities that were average students that didn't get hired by a software company in the beginning. They would do like a 3-month contract and then they would be laid off for a couple of months and then for their after graduating, right? And then after that, they would wait a couple of months and then they would have to go for another 3-month or a 7-month contract and they get laid off. And then after that, it would happen again until they found a stable position at a larger company. And that seems to be the story for people that are average, unless you're above average in some way, right? So my suggestion for this is if you are average, because I don't believe in uh, the fact that if you're average, you'll stay average. I believe in hard work will push you over the edge and make you better. So by doing, you get better and working hard. So if you can go independent and create your own company and not be like these people that pull tricks, I say do it. And also try a side hustle and create jobs rather than and develop your community so that more money flows into it and these positions open up and more people can get employment. Create opportunities because the more money that flows into the businesses in your areas, um, and the more that they do, the more people will spend in that area, and the more it will flow back to you. So don't always think about just developing yourself because it's a group thing, right? If you work in an area that and think about only gaining money for yourself, it'll be harder to become successful in that area. Does that make sense? So if you have a bunch of companies in a particular area that are doing well and do business with each other, and they all grow, you're going to have more opportunity not only for getting business and doing business because you're going to trust people that are in your area more. You're going to have more money flowing and more money spent in that area, and as a result, the neighborhoods will be better. There will be more jobs. There'll be better education. There'll be more opportunities. So create jobs, create happier people, create nicer people, and that's the story of Silicon Valley, right? Because if you go to Silicon Valley in the past, you would find out a lot of people were getting high-paying jobs in those areas, right? Um, because a lot of the companies were growing and making a lot of money and hiring people and developing them in that area. There was good management, so these software companies grew in size and um, these opportunities arose. So think about don't think that the end game is money. Think that it is development, but also be aware of these people these companies that are thinking the other way about screwing people over, making making that dollar and being better and lying, right? And not thinking about developing people rather and making more rich people that help people rather thinking about their end game. Another thing that you should be aware of is that if you do work for a large company, past employers are very unlikely. This is why I say deal with people and build those people relationships um, versus dealing with big businesses, because past employers are very rarely going to help you with your business after you leave during layoffs or if you're moving jobs, even if you were good at your job, right? Keep this in mind and be aware of it. And that's why you should always try and create things, do things on the side that might be able to help you, regardless if you spend 10 years or 20 years or like dedicated them. Getting business isn't easy. And but regardless, even if you did find long-term employment and stuff, what a lot of companies have found is that keeping skilled employees for a very long time is getting harder and harder. So, for example, even these ACON, like 90, like students that are in the top percentile, are working for these companies for like $500,000 a year. These software companies, right? They'll work there and they'll stay, especially as new grads, and then they're going to stay like they're going to stay a year, and then after that year, there's a turnover, right? Um, so then they have to hire someone else in order to deal with their position because the layoffs of these people quitting is so high. The reason why is because they're smart enough to go on and do their own thing. So they won't stay for long-term employment. Oftentimes they'll try their own startups or try to generate money doing something else. And when it becomes successful, because oftentimes they will, right? I have friends that have become close to millionaires just like through investing in Bitcoin or doing other such things, right? So through their projects and stuff like that, because they can. Because after you work for a large company, not only does that help you, but those connections people will automatically give you and those opportunities people will give you because you worked in that for doing business with you is much higher. So they're more likely to do B2B business with the person from Harvard, right? That builds a program because also the teachers and stuff will give you opportunities. It's those connections that are important, right? So yeah, this is my I guess 40-minute blurb on things about the industry. I say always work hard, always try to develop yourself. Don't try to be perfect, just go for it and help people, help develop your community, right, wherever you may live. And oh yeah, be a decent person. But those are some things you should know about working in the IT industry. I think this is my blurb for 2020. I hope you're doing well with this COVID thing going on. Unfortunately, a lot of people have been laid off because of it, not just because businesses are struggling, but yeah, because the businesses are struggling because of this quarantine and stuff like that. So yeah, that's food for thought. All right, till next time. I hope you got something out of this and it gave you something to reflect on. But enjoy and goodbye.